Hello, I'm John Dickerson of CBS News. I'm here with Amy Walter of the Cook Political Report. Amy, Hillary Clinton, she came back on stage a little bit this week as a part of the Clinton Global Initiative. She gave an interview, her first one since being Secretary of State, in New York Magazine. Some people, Joan Walsh of Salon, wrote basically, I've already got Clinton fatigue. We're 3 years from the election. Is that the question here is that something that's going to be a real problem for her, that people have seen her so much and kind of are being fed her whether she wants to be or not, that by the time she actually decides to run for president and wants to talk to people about the campaign, they just don't want to hear from her because they'll be sick of her.
They're already sick of her, and they just have been reminded about mostly the bad things about Hillary Clinton as opposed to the good things about Hillary Clinton. I mean, she's as high as she possibly could be right now in terms of her popularity, in terms of her stature, and we all know she has nowhere to go but down, right? There's no way she can keep these kind of numbers in a presidential election. So we knew that that was going to shrink. The question was how long before we got to that point. It's one thing to say, well, by 2015, boom, voters are going to be polarized again and she's going to have those same problems. It's another thing to say she's going to have those problems in 2014. And that's where I think the problem lies.
It feels like she's in a bind because on the one hand, I argued that she needs a Rip Van Winkle strategy. She just needs to disappear for 2 years and then just come down from the mountains and then, but of course if she does that, what fills the vacuum is the quotes from Clinton World and the stories about, there was a story about Doug Band who ran the Clinton Global Initiative in the New Republic this week that is not flattering about that area. And so if it's the old bind. If you don't play in the stories, if you don't give interviews, if you don't talk, then the stories are written about things that you have no control over. On the other hand, she talks and is in these stories, people get sick of her.
Well, this is what's so tough about running when you're not an elected official. Remember when Bill Bradley was trying to run in that same moment in the 2000 election? Here he was, a guy who had so much respect when he was a senator from New Jersey. Now he was trying to come off the mount and be this sort of voice of another part of the Democratic establishment. People don't really want to know, once you've been out of it, you're not given as much credibility as when you're in the mix on it. So that's where I think she has that trouble. And you're right, the story about her gets filled in, not by what she's currently doing, but about what she has done. And so that New York story becomes, the New York Magazine story becomes perfect fodder, right? Here she is, she's trying to set herself up as, okay, here I am, I'm over here. Yes, I'm part of the establishment, but I'm not going to be a third Obama term. I'm my own person, my own identity. Well, what is that identity? Well, it's about when I was the senator and Secretary of State, but I don't want all of those things. And then when First Lady, but not all of those things, just a good, but then, well, who are you now? Who do you want to be? What kind of presidential campaign do you want to run? Very tough to do when you're sitting out just giving speeches or sitting at the Clinton Global Initiative conference.
I think that's exactly right. The piece read like it was written in 2015, and we're not there yet. It had that, she gave that precise line you just gave, literally came out of her mouth, which is, I had a front row seat, but I had my own independent voice, which makes perfect sense, but it makes sense 2 years from now, as you pointed out. The other thing that struck me about that piece is that you could see the forces of Clinton World perfectly aligning in the quotes in the piece to tick off all the perceived vulnerabilities she has. So there's the idea that her campaign in 2008 was a mess as a management thing. Well, there were plenty of people saying that her management of the State Department was very good. There was the view that Bill Clinton played too much of a role in her life in the 2008 campaign. There were all these blind quotes of people saying, Bill Clinton was never really mentioned when she was at the State Department. That kind of orchestration made it feel like we're already in the middle of a campaign, adding, of course, to this view that people might get tired of her. As the last question to you, I want to ask is, if somebody wants to go after Hillary Clinton, is there a clear path in the Democratic Party? If somebody wants to run against her, in her last election, it was obvious. The war, her vote against the war, was her vulnerability. Does this Clinton fatigue? Is that a useful inroad for somebody who wants to challenge her?
It's part of it. I mean, it's still part of, this is the old establishment, right? At a time when, we've seen it definitely in the Republican Party, the Tea Party has come to define the Republican Party. Forget the establishment has led us astray. Going back to the Clinton era, many people remember it as a good time in terms of the economy, but it came with all of the baggage of the Clinton drama. Do we want to go back to that? She's obviously not a new figure in American politics. She's been around for a long, long time. And what are her positions going to be especially when it comes to national security, since she's been the Secretary of State. I think those are still issues that are going to divide the Democratic primary on the issues of drones, interventions in Afghanistan, Syria, etc. She's going to have to talk about those in a way that's probably not going to be all that appealing to the base.
I have a lot to talk about for 3 years. Amy Walter, thanks very much.